What caused the underworld of the capital planet of Coruscant to literally become a nightmarish hellscape? Greetings, Acolytes, and welcome back to the Archives. Coruscant, the capital of the Grand Republic, and the beacon of metropolitan advancement for the entire galaxy. We have known this planet to lie at the very epicenter of the hyperlane convergence, making it the perfect hub for the Republic itself. It is where the Senate convenes and the Jedi Temple rests. It's the kind of place where every being in the galaxy dreams of making it big. It is a planet of dreams, corruption, and nightmares. Even the most fabulous of the elite still have difficulty buying in and renting out places that they want to go on Coruscant. It is a planet which is now entirely made up of a pure cityscape. But that's all on the surface. The surface world of Coruscant and what lies beneath are two diametrically opposed things. We got to see a little bit of what the mid-surface levels were like during the Clone Wars, a crime-ridden, unsavory place filled with all kinds of scum and villainy, all of which culminates down in the infamous level 1313. But what lies even further beneath? What is Coruscant like in the places where the sun never shines, the levels so deep that they have become buried and forgotten by the rest of the galaxy? Well, my friends, that is what we are going to explore in today's holocron, so make sure your blaster has a fresh power pack within it, because you're going to need it as we descend into the depths of Coruscant. Before we begin though, our scanners have detected something concerning. Many of the acolytes that have visited our archives have not yet subscribed to our channel, so if you've been enjoying the daily Star Wars lore, reach out and crush that subscribe button. It is your destiny. But now, back to the ugliness of the lower levels. The entire world of Coruscant is covered in city. From ancient times until now, the denizens of the capital would never tear down any structure to make them new. Instead, once the Coruscant city took up every inch of the planet's surface, the dwellers simply began building on top of it. This is why places in the city are referred to as levels, since each level and layer is just a new part of the city built upon the old. Those that were wealthy enough to ascend to or live in the upper parts of the city did so, and everyone else that was less fortunate were abandoned and left behind. This would continue for thousands of years, with Coruscant being in an ever-present state of construction. Billions of beings traveled to the capital world every year. And so, with the population increasing, so did the levels of the massive city. Each level is numbered by how many layers it is from the bottom, with the highest and most elite point of Coruscant currently being level 5127. And this is what makes the city planet a breathtaking entity much like the ocean, because as you descend deeper into Coruscant, it becomes darker and stranger with every passing level. It becomes more hostile, more bizarre. You've likely come across whispers and rumors of level 1313, which is supposedly the most dangerous level on Coruscant that one can reach by normal means. This place is known for its rampant crime and the fact that it's completely under control of the Black Sun Syndicate. 1313 is a lawless place where the police force and even the Coruscant Guard do not bother visiting, likely fearing for their own safety. Only Jedi, extremely notable bounty hunters, and members of the Black Sun can properly find their way through this level effectively, and even for them, it's dangerous. The most infamous part of this part of the city is the Black Market Trading Center, where one can buy illegal weapons such as a displacer gun, and even old lightsabers, with the Jedi notably despising this practice. The Jedi Order has even made efforts to shut this down, but tackling all of level 1313 is too costly for the Jedi Order's time and resources, so the Jedi just track down leads where they can and shut them down as they go. However, the crime on this level has spiraled out of control, as the denizens have realized just how much the surface has forgotten about them and left them behind to rot. They have formed their own government under the Black Sun, and every being does what is right in their own eyes for the fate of survival. The reason this has happened is because many beings come to Coruscant seeking the dream life, luxury, wealth, greed. But then, once they find out just how expensive the surface is, they are forced into the underlevels. There, they eventually get buried under more and more city, resulting in them going to crime in order to stay alive. But this is only level 1313. What happens when you decide to take that one dilapidated elevator that goes even lower? What is the absolute hell that awaits you in the bottom 1000 levels? What is at the very bottom of the corrupted greed, wealth, gluttony? Where does it all end? Or rather, where does it all begin? The capital of Coruscant grew so large that the bottommost levels were literally closed off from the surface, and the denizens that were trapped in the darkness are left there to rot eternally. This is the true Coruscant underworld, a place that never saw the light of day. The bottom 1,000 were all in what was basically a big canyon filled with garbage and debris. Due to the canyon's enclosure by the larger buildings, the air was trapped and created a microclimate at least 3 layers deep. The trapped moisture caused rainstorms and convective wind patterns within the canyon floor, making the underworld like its own small planet. And it might as well be a completely different planet anyway, as it housed a larger population than many star systems did. Billions upon billions of beings were beyond the protection of the world's security force, leaving them at the mercy of gangs, thugs, exploiters, and of course, man-eating vermin, which we'll explore further in just a moment. The underworld was extremely dark, lit only by artificial light either from technology or natural fungi. It was loud, the air being filled with the banging and clanging of machinery, giving power to the more well-to-do surface dwellers. One might say the unique thing about the bottom 1,000 is that maybe some are in touch with the natural surface of Coruscant as it once was. Unfortunately though, that is not the case. Not much is known about level 1, or any of the levels near it even, but they are considered utterly uninhabitable. They are covered by a thick layer of garbage, thousands of years of it dumped from the surface. But this isn't household trash. It functions as the Republic's waste bin. During the era of the Empire, one could find entire Venator-class Star Destroyers lying nose down in trash heaps, laying there in the underworld. Along with this, every living thing was constantly exposed to the pollution, sewage, and even reactor radiation. Needless to say, disease ran rampant, and the poor people who had to live in this place only wished that they could be on level 1313, because at least up there, they wouldn't have to deal with the creatures. The biggest problem with the underlevels was not the crime, or even having to scavenge for food. It was the disgusting and horrific mutants which dwelt in the darkness, all of them just as hungry as the unfortunate residents. Such monsters were termed as the corridor ghouls, mutated canine-like creatures with pale skin and appeared to hunt in packs. And then you had the hive rats, which were giant man-eating rodents that could grow up to 9 feet long, with bodies covered in tumors and sores. The only thing pleasant about the hive rats to the underdwellers was the fact that they preyed upon the duracrete slugs. These were parasite mollusks that dug their tunnels into the building foundations, feeding off of the duracrete within. This was then excreted from their skin, forming armor. They could grow up to 32 feet long, and if not kept in check, they caused all kinds of structural damage to the already unstable buildings in the underworld. But probably one of the most disturbing predators of this world would be the Kuthons. In appearance, the Kuthons resembled decaying corpses, with loose flaps of flesh, stringy, dirty hair, and lipless mouths filled with sharp teeth. Skin grew to cover the eyes, and there was an egg-like organ where the eye should have been, moving restlessly, sealed within its sockets. These creatures craved flesh as their main diet, and unlike many things in the underworld, we actually do know where these awful beings came from, but it doesn't give us comfort. Their ancestors were humans who were banished from the surface for their crimes, subsequently residing in the darkness of the Undercity for thousands of years. This genetically changed them into these horrific creatures that became the subject of countless horror stories and nightmares. But these stories were real. But there's even more than this. Believed to be extinct, there were a species of monsters known as the Teozin, which resided in the very lower levels. The Teozin was a gigantic centipede-like creature capable of spitting red webbing to entrap its prey. They could grow up to 64 feet long, roughly 20 meters, and had a translucent shell which was capable of diffusing energy. This made them nearly completely impervious to blasters or even lightsaber blades. To top it all off, the Teozin were force sensitive and capable of cloaking themselves in the force so that they could not be sensed. Darth Maul would encounter one while in the underlevels of Coruscant, and he described attempting to sense it as almost like encountering a surface, one so slick that one could not find a grip to hold onto. But now, we have one final creature in the lower levels that we want to talk about. A monster whose name has yet to be revealed, and who we aren't sure of just yet. The monster appears in exactly 2 panels of the Star Wars 2020 comic run. Here, when Lando, Chewbacca, and Nia Nub were in the Falcon and on the run from the TIE fighters after pulling a rebel attack on Coruscant, the Empire chases them down into the underlevels of the city, where the Falcon just barely escaped being swallowed whole, one easily the size of an exogorth. It had giant tentacles, and teeth the length of the Falcon itself. Its hide was thick, and it didn't even flinch when a TIE fighter crashed right into the side of its mouth. It feels insane that a monster easily the size of 2 Star Destroyers actually lives beneath the city of Coruscant, proving the underlevels of the city are truly a nightmare realm. So my friends, the great city planet of Coruscant, often referred to as the Queen or the Jewel of the Core Worlds, is the capital of both the Republic and the Galactic Empire, and it stood as the center of the galaxy for tens of thousands of years. Upon looking at a galactic map, one can see how many hyperlanes converge on Coruscant, making it the most well-traveled and bustling planet in the entire galaxy. The city, which is known for being built up layer by layer, climbs into the very atmosphere. The last parts of the planet's surface that can still be seen is the peak of a mountain, one which is reserved as a historical site. But what was the great center of the galaxy like before it was the capital of the Republic? What was Coruscant like before its glory days? What were the settlers like before the city reached into the clouds? And how did they deal with their problems before the Jedi placed their temple on the world? Some time ago, we decided to talk all about the history of Kamino, and in today's Holocron, we are continuing this planet series with the ancient history of Coruscant. So now, let's wind back the clock to the earliest days of the galaxy. The earliest records of Star Wars exist around 200,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, which is literally a 100,000 year gap between the appearance of the first Sith King of Korriban, meaning that Coruscant itself outdates the Sith. The beginnings of Coruscant all surround the war between 2 races of beings, the alien species of the Tuong and the Zel, who scholars believe are the ancestral races of humans. The Tuong species are what would actually go on to become the Mandalorians, and would inspire Mandalorian culture, which still thrives today. But the histories of the Tuong and the Zel are vague and difficult to decipher. The only thing scholars will be able to tell you clearly is about the war, and how this war shaped the galaxy at the time. But they've been able to piece together scraps of history based on archaeological digs, ancient manuscripts, and a single surviving work of art, a poem written by the Tuong known as the Werda Verda. The poem is more than 100 verses divided into 11 chapters. Most scholars have thus far been able to translate from the dead language just about 10 verses from chapter 9. This poem was written by the Tuong after a great victory over the Zel. Back in that day, the planet of Coruscant was actually called Notron. The Zel were many in population, 13 nations in total, and the Tuong leader, the Doom of Alamara, had recently been killed in battle, and was succeeded by an individual known as Rexitu the Unconquerable. As an aside, Doom and Rexitu would technically be the first Mandalores, before Mandalorian culture was even a thing, which I thought was a really cool addition to the lore, and just goes to show you the reach of the Mandalorians, and how they're deeply ingrained in galactic history. Moving on though, the Tuong were now few in number, but decided to go to battle one more time, and perish in a final conflict, as they were now completely outnumbered by their enemies, the Zel. However, something unexpected would happen the day that they went to war. A volcanic eruption occurred which destroyed the city of Zel and sent the species running. The Tuong then took this as a sign of divine favor and dubbed themselves the Da Werda Verda, the Shadow Warriors, as they would then author a poem of the same name. The 10 translated verses describe how the event went down from the Tuong perspective, which we will now read from. And so upon the pyre burned the Doom of Elmara, and the warrior band stood as ragged bandits, in zigzag lines of mourning. With the dawn of the flat-faced Zel would come, cackling and howling, oozing mirth and tricks, and find the shade of doom departed, and the Tuongs unprotected. And so with the dawn would our woe be revealed. Our once bright armaments would become stacked with grave goods, trophies from the Zel children. Our flesh would become smoke given to uncaring gods, and the sky would forget our names. With the death upon him, Rexitu the Unconquerable prepared to be stripped of all by his enemies, but vowed that his honor would be the last to be torn away. And so the Unconquerable gathered his kinsmen and his oath-girdlings alike. They polished their fearsome helms, that they may flash even in the weak sun of Neutron. They rewrapped the hilts of their weapons and pounded straight the shafts, that they might slake their thirst in Zel Iker a final time. Assembled they ascended, in taunt tong lines, to the high place where the Reaver had staked his standard before it was ever cast down into the mire. They gazed out over the gathering places, and walking ways of the great Zel where they scaled peak and cradled valley, the lines of light ordering the night. They unfurled the Tong banner, reversed, a reckless thing snapping in the dark, awaiting Zel eyes, and they performed ceremonies of leave-taking, for now they had to die to the world and must be remade among the stars. When the dawn came, the Zel awakened and saw the Tongs upon the high place and were afraid, for the morning light caught the glint of the helms and the weapons and created phantoms and warriors made of dazzle and distance. But the cleverest of them were not deceived and saw how few they really were, and so they assembled without haste, merry in mockery, and prepared to march, and in the high place we awaited death. But then came a shaking of the ground, and the sun's wan light was eclipsed by the bright and terrible fire that exploded from the rock. The patterns of the great Zel shivered and broke, and after this came darkness, as the very air turned to black ash. The Zel fell on their faces in terror, and from the high place we ran in haste to meet them, and we were cloaked in the shadow. The Maker had come to unmake, and the Tongs would be his instrument. This romantic poem depicts how the Tongs thought they were going to meet their extinction at the hand of their enemy, the Zel, only to be delivered by a freak volcanic eruption, allowing them to snatch victory out of the jaws of defeat. Da Werda Verda would go down in history, being taught to every Coruscanti schoolchild and Mandalorian youngling from that day on. The Mandalorians actually revised the Da Werda Verda sometime after the Mandalore the Ultimate's reign, and would update the old legend, renaming it the Rage of the Shadow Warriors. It was said that the trainers of the first batch of clone commandos taught this song to them, and that they had to perform it along with the dance as a way of connecting them to their Mandalorian culture and roots, inspiring them before battle. Unfortunately though for the Tong people, the histories indicate that although the Zel were weakened by this mighty defeat, the 13 nations rallied together and would force the Tong off of Neutron entirely, leaving the planet. The alien people would find asylum on the planet known as Rune until they found a new homeworld, one which they named Mandalore after their new leader, Mandalore the First. But in this time, the Zel celebrated their victory by rebuilding their great city, making it even more grand and beautiful than before, dedicating it to their mother goddess, known simply as Anarchy. By 100,000 BBY, the Zel, now in a time of planetary peace and prosperity, had expanded out and covered their world with towns and cities, finding great wealth and influence as they connected one by one. But this was merely the first level, and would soon become what is known as the Ecumenopolis, translating into the world-spanning city. 100,000 years had passed since the time of their great war with the Tong, and by now the 13 leaders of the Zel nations had been buried in ice crypts far in the Coruscant's south pole. The ice crypts still exist as one of the wonders of the galaxy, though they are beneath hundreds of meters of city, under what is the modern-day Hasamadi warehouse district in Coruscant that you could still find. The ice crypts are temperature controlled to keep them from melting, as they are now historical sites, but citizens are forbidden from entering the crypts alone. By 90,000 BBY, Coruscant City had fully covered the entire planet, and was now beginning to build upwards. It's likely by this era that Coruscant was at or slightly above our world's technology. By then, the ancient Gree had visited Coruscant, and added greatly to their technology, the Gree becoming influential members of a new society. The humans were then able to create atmosphere scrubbers, which basically converted CO2 into a replenishable source of oxygen, since by now, there were no more trees on the world. The human population also skyrocketed, which required special technology for farms, advanced delivery pipelines, and recycling plants. To deal with the waste and garbage issue, Coruscant began literally launching their planet's trash into space canisters. And then, with ships called garbage scows, they would tow them out of the star system. During this era, all was going well with the planet of Coruscant as they continued to build the massive planet city upward, creating dozens upon dozens of layers. By around the year 30,000 BBY, the ancient evil species known as the Rakata would discover Coruscant and consolidated it into their infinite empire, desiring to conquer it above all else. They would take many humans as slaves, specifically Force-sensitive individuals, who they would then train to become Force hounds, and would seek out worlds rich with the Force in order to conquer and consume. However, those that remained behind took their new ruler's Force-based technology and began to reverse engineer it. And this is when, for the first time, what is known as sleeper ships were invented. In the days before hyperspace travel, the inhabitants of the galaxy had to explore it in other ways. The first way was through sleeper ships. True to their name, they were ships capable of achieving faster than light travel through very rudimentary dimensional drive technology. However, this was extremely slow, and travel between distant stars could last decades or even centuries on end. To keep the ship's inhabitants safe, they took brave volunteers to be kept in a state of suspended animation, hence the name, the sleeper ship. These ships once landed on distant worlds, as they would then awaken the inhabitants and allow them to carry out their duties of exploration. Over the next few centuries, Coruscant dispatched many sleeper ships around the galaxy, and by the year 27,500 BBY, they had established colonies on several worlds, including Alderaan, Duro, and Corellia. And finally, by the year 25,200 BBY, the Infinite Empire collapsed after their war with the Jedi, and a species-wide plague of the Rakata caused them to be cut off from the Force entirely. Like many slave species around the galaxy, the Coruscant humans rebelled against the Infinite Empire and reclaimed rulership of their world. By 25,053, Coruscant established a connection with the planets that comprised the core worlds around them, including all of the worlds that they had helped to colonize. After the defeat of the Rakata, Coruscant would be the site of the signing of the Galactic Constitution, a document written by a member of House Organa, and the Galactic Republic would be officially founded and named Coruscant their capital world. In order to actually travel between the core worlds, they developed something called hyperspace cannons, which functioned exactly as they sounded. The cannons would launch ships straight into hyperspace from the planet's surface, finally allowing a faster method of travel. Ships traveling by this method were often equipped with drag technology in order to help them slow down. But by the year 25,000 BBY, there was another breakthrough that would change the Star Wars galaxy forever. Corellia had finally officially reverse engineered the Rakatan hyperdrives and starships, and they could now travel between the worlds of the Republic in a matter of days. Coruscant became the anchor and the central hub of many hyperspace trade routes, including the two most popular, known as the Perlemian trade route and the Spin. This greatly increased Coruscant's wealth, which added on to its power as the capital of the Republic. But in this same year, the trade route would do more for Coruscant, the Republic, and the entire galaxy that would echo throughout all of history onward. This specific hyperlane brought the Republic into contact with the Jedi Order on the distant planet of Ossus, and the Jedi and the Republic connected for the first time in history. Jedi Master Han Tiar took it upon himself to tour the Republic on behalf of the Jedi. After meeting with the Parliament and then taking his news back to the Jedi Order, the Council spent several weeks in deliberation, until the Council finally decided to become the protectors of this brand new forming Republic. The Jedi saw the Republic as the future of peace and prosperity of the galaxy, and the Force guided them to be its guardians. This was the purpose that the Jedi had been waiting for. They established a great presence on Coruscant, and the rest is how we know it. And that was for thousands of years, the Jedi Temple stood on Coruscant as a beacon of peace and security. During countless wars with the Sith, the Jedi operated out of this single location, which stood proudly as the epicenter of the planet itself. But of course, the ziggurat-style palace was not always looked upon fondly, and the opinion towards the temple and the Jedi that resided within it would begin to drastically change in the waning days of the Republic. One such opinion would come directly from Master Qui-Gon Jinn, who at one point in canon stated that he disagreed with the fact that the Jedi Temple stayed in the heart of the Republic, as Qui-Gon believed that this was a crucial mistake, and that the Jedi Temple should be moved off of Coruscant immediately. Qui-Gon was always considered a contrarian among the Jedi, and had many ideas that were considered unpopular and abnormal. But even for Qui-Gon Jinn's takes, this seems a bit surprising. Why would Qui-Gon think that the Jedi were wrong for living on Coruscant? And according to historical and future events, was Qui-Gon Jinn right? Let's go ahead and open up yet another holocron and find out why. This opinion from Qui-Gon has come from the canon Age of the Republic comic, this issue focusing on Master Qui-Gon himself. After a thrilling opening of Qui-Gon rescuing a priestess from an uprising happening on her world, Qui-Gon is accused by the priestess of being a coward for not fighting on behalf of her, and she mentions that she always heard that the Jedi were great warriors. On one of the rooftop gardens on Coruscant sometime later, Qui-Gon is thinking over this interaction, having been greatly troubled by what the priestess had said. Then of course, along comes Yoda, casually asking about his submitting a full report to the council, and that's when the two begin a conversation about the real reason Yoda had come to Qui-Gon. Yoda assured Qui-Gon that he wasn't a coward for following the Jedi way, but that's when we get this interaction, and Qui-Gon's true opinion on Coruscant and the temple. Qui-Gon says this: "Being called a coward isn't what bothered me, Master Yoda. It was being called a great warrior. Even here on Coruscant, the home of the Jedi Council, there is little understanding of our purpose. We are seen as soldiers, or servants of politicians, with little mention of the Force itself." Yoda is somewhat shocked, but then says this: "Mysterious the Force remains to many, and misunderstood those who use the Force often are." But Qui-Gon will not let go of the point, and says this: and yet, our actions are a reflection of our purpose. Perhaps the Jedi Council residing here in the capital is a part of the problem. We are used as a weapon of the Republic, and thus we are seen as such, perhaps even by ourselves. At this point, Yoda doesn't have much to say other than to tell Qui-Gon that the Council wouldn't agree on this point at all. But Qui-Gon is firm and says this: "Of course they wouldn't, but be it the Council or myself, I feel there is a loss of vision." Yoda is now unable to reply to Qui-Gon's point, and simply tells the Jedi Master that when they have questions, it's best to seek the Force about it. Qui-Gon takes this advice to heart, and does intend to meditate on the Force about the path of a Jedi and their views as a warrior. But we want to go ahead and stop here and talk about this lofty quote. Qui-Gon states that the Jedi Council residing on Coruscant is a problem because it's easier for the Senate and politicians to get a quick line to talk to them. This isn't a new problem for the Jedi, as the entire issue with the Order during the Republic Classic era, and the Clone Wars as well, is that they became too political and too involved with the Senate, politics, and the Republic itself. While this has been pointed out time and time again, Qui-Gon's idea that the problem rests with the Jedi Temple and where it lives is something that is usually never brought up. Qui-Gon may not be wrong about this though. As servants of peace in the galaxy, having them positioned right in the capital would make it seem like they were the sword of the Republic, which of course, they would eventually become. It's quite possible that many of these thoughts also stemmed from Qui-Gon's own master in Dooku, who held many of the same viewpoints, believing that the Jedi had become slaves to the Senate and to the Republic. But there is far more to break down here that's very important. Part of the issue not only lies with how easy it is for politicians to get in touch with the Jedi, but also that maybe the Jedi only living around the prosperous, the extremely wealthy metropolitan city of Coruscant blinds them to all the issues plaguing the Outer Rim territories, removing them from planets that truly need their help. The Jedi Order in the Republic Classic era were notorious for being very slow to respond to calls for help in the Outer Rim, especially since a lot of these planets were not a part of the Republic. This was one of the main reasons why the Separatists wanted to secede from the Republic, since they were not getting fair treatment from the Senate or the Jedi. Without even going into too much detail, we can already see that there is a lot wrong with the Jedi Order's choice to place their temple at the center of the Republic. But now poses the even greater question: if not Coruscant, where should the temple have been posted? Originally, the Jedi resided on Tython, but were forced to move when the war with the Rakata drove the planet into an uninhabitable space. Tython was a planet so strong in the Force that its residents all had to maintain perfect balance. Otherwise, the planet would be subject to violent storms which were deadly even to Force wielders. After moving off of Tython, the Jedi Order would operate out of Ossus, and eventually their connection to Tython would die, as it was surrounded by unstable and fluctuating hyperlanes in and out of the deep core that were closing off, cutting the Jedi off from their original world. On Ossus though, the Jedi behaved much differently, and the temple on Ossus was a giant library which housed endless amounts of knowledge. It was open to the public, and the oddest thing was that no Jedi was required to stay there. Ossus was the primary hub for the Jedi Order, but it was only one of thousands of worlds controlled by the Jedi which had various temples and outposts. Back in this day, the Jedi were spread out and usually occupied one planet or system as a watchman. The Jedi Watchmen are still a thing though in the Republic Classic era, but are delegated to a handful of Jedi Sentinels. These were the days when the Jedi were allowed to have families, and they would be the Watchmen of their home planet until called off-world. But all in all, Ossus was simply the home of the Jedi Council, and there were some Jedi in the Order that never laid eyes on what many called the Jedi's home. This era of Jedi are the greatest peacekeepers in galactic history, but this would all change with Exar Kun, after Exar destroyed the Great Library on Ossus, causing a nearby star to go supernova, scorching the very Earth of the Jedi's home. Only so much knowledge was able to be saved from the destruction of the world, and from that point on, the Jedi would keep this knowledge secret, held extremely close to the chest. Because at the time the Order was so spread out, they were unable to call for help against Exar Kun in time, and not enough Jedi were able to rally to the planet. It would be this event where the Jedi would close the doors to the public forever, as well as issuing the mandate that all Jedi would reside and live in their temple. Following this, the Jedi moved to the world of Dantooine, where we saw them becoming far more dogmatic and unreasonable. This is where we begin to see them not considering the problems happening right in their backyard. We all know the story of the Jedi Council neglecting to respond to the Mandalorians, and this resulting with Revan. But during this time, the Jedi were even failing to properly take care of problems that were plaguing Dantooine. Very fixable problems, which were being largely ignored. After all of this, the Jedi Order agreed with the Republic that they would officially move to the capital of Coruscant. Fast forward to the Great Galactic War and the sacking of Coruscant by Malgus, the Jedi Temple is destroyed, and the Order is once again left with no home. They would eventually visit the planet of Tython, their original birthplace, and build a beautiful temple there. But of course, they would return to Coruscant as the heart of the Republic. What's intriguing is Luke Skywalker, once he rebuilt the Jedi post-Order 66, did not return straight to repairing the Temple of Coruscant. The New Republic was still being established, and Luke wasn't too keen on repeating the mistakes of the past. But if you want a full video on this, please let us know in the comments below. In the end, Qui-Gon Jinn was proven absolutely correct about his stance on Coruscant, the Jedi Temple, and the heart of the Republic. He thought it was inappropriate that the Jedi were surrounded by politicians and vast, ungodly amounts of wealth. He thought it sent a message to the rest of the galaxy that not only were the Jedi the warriors of the Senate, being able to be moved around at its will, but they were also elite, and that while some were worthy of the Jedi's intervention in problems, others were not. Many believed the Jedi would never answer their calls, become elitists, and eventually tyrants, obsessed with power. The Jedi Order being located on Coruscant itself would eventually be manipulated by Palpatine, as Sidious would tell them that all the Jedi Order always wanted was control over the Republic and Coruscant itself. Qui-Gon Jinn was absolutely right, and moving to Coruscant was one of the Jedi Order's largest mistakes, not only due to the Sith Shrine within, but the implications of power and those worthy of a Jedi's protection. But anyway, my friends, the planet of Coruscant is easily one of the most interesting places in all of the lore. What many people do not know is that Coruscant is actually roughly the size of Earth. However, unlike Earth, Coruscant roughly has 3 trillion members of its population, despite an official census that was taken just following the Clone Wars, which put the number at roughly 1 trillion. However, many believe that this number was incorrect. The census that was taken actually did not include temporary workers, transients, unregistered residents, or people living in other orbital facilities. This would put it roughly around 430 times Earth's current population as of 2024. Roughly 70% of Coruscant is made up of humans. In fact, humans are believed to have originated from Coruscant, and the other 30% is known as other sentient life forms. However, exactly how this is classified is unclear. Something interesting about Coruscant is how it is viewed by the Greater Republic. Many believe that it is the core of the government. It is not a place to be vacationed, sunbathed, or a location that is worth sightseeing. It is a place of pure business. Its environment is extremely unique, as it is made up of orbital mirrors, which were set up that would reflect the sun's warmth and life, reflecting it back at Coruscant during daylight hours. In Legends continuity, Coruscant actually did have naturally occurring storms, with it being recorded in the year 3 ABY that there were thunderstorms and rain on the city planet. However, in canon, the weather is artificially maintained, meaning everything was either controlled centrally by the Republic or by the Empire. Coruscant originally had a big problem. Its sun was not very large, which meant that the planet was not particularly habitable, and many species could not naturally live there. Coruscant also ran into a different problem, as its gigantic buildings created unusual and unpredictable microclimates, which caused varying degrees of temperature and air pressure between the higher and the lower altitudes within the tallest of Coruscant's buildings. When it came to air, there was a different problem. The upper levels of Coruscant were of course filtered, but there are 5,000 plus levels on the city planet. Essentially, the higher up you lived was marked by your air quality. The rich, the influential, and the wealthy had near perfect air. However, those that were left in the undercity, buried and forgotten, leveled by the trillions of pounds of waste that Coruscant produces every single day. The air was considered to be barely breathable. Toxic fumes produced by millennia of the planet-wide cityscape's vehicle and factory waste, all of that compounded on the poor. Many of the most influential and richest citizens didn't even breathe air at all, but rather, a form of purified gas was their preference. Many people would even bring their own private air supply, not trusting the conditions of Coruscant. But there was yet another problem. The countless life forms produced a massive amount of carbon dioxide and heat. Because of this, Coruscant required thousands of atmospheric dampeners, those that were stationed in the atmosphere in order to prevent it from falling apart completely. Initially, this was developed by the Galactic Republic and was known as the Coruscant Atmospheric Reclamation Project. Those that lived above were terrified of those that lived below. They were cannibalistic criminals. In fact, many of them had been banished there hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. They had grown into monstrosities, mutants, and they were extremely dangerous. But there was something deep within Coruscant that the people needed, and that was the power relay. Stations deep within Coruscant were billions upon billions of pounds of debris that was previously buildings lay. Their foundations cracked, housing rats, mutants of different varieties, and yet still distributing power to the surface of the world. Life on Coruscant varies drastically. Many believe it is the place of democracy and only a place of the rich. However, it also houses the most dangerous people in the entire galaxy. Those criminals typically flee to the lower levels, the lowest of which this is still accessible to this day being level 5. The reason for this is it has been said that the Republic, and then later the Empire, did not exist in the lower levels of Coruscant, and there were popular bars and other shady locations, including black markets, where the most dangerous villains in the galaxy would gather. The only place that they were welcome, because essentially, it was truly lawless. A place extremely close to the galactic government, and yet, no government existed at all. But there were still despicable things that went on closer to the surface. Just below the middle class of Coruscant lie the gangs, the mafia, and warfare. Criminal syndicates like the Black Sun ruled large portions of territory in the Coruscant underworld. Here, they could smuggle their drugs freely, close to the surface, yet abiding by the lawlessness that lay below. Just below the surface was nearly entirely run by gangs. The absolute saddest fact about Coruscant is that we only see the 1% of the 1% in film and animation most of the time. We only explore the levels of Coruscant that are populated by the wealthy. Not only the normally wealthy, but the absurdly wealthy. Most individuals on Coruscant lived an absolutely horrid life. They breathed subpar air. They were literally buried by the trash of those more fortunate than them. Another fascinating part of Coruscant's history is its transition under the Galactic Empire, which we actually get a pretty good look at in the canon Tarkin novel. There, it says this. He had heard that one needn't have been absent from Coruscant for years to be startled by the changes. Each day saw buildings razed, demolished, incorporated into even larger and taller monstrosities, or merely stripped of Republic-era ornamentation, or renovated in accordance with a more severe aesthetic. Curved lines were wielding to harsh angles, sophistication to declaration. Fashions had changed along with similar lines, with few outside the Imperial court affecting cloaks, head clothes, or garnish robes. By most accounts though, Coruscanti were very satisfied, especially those who lived and worked in the upper tiers, the tiers of the fathomless cityscape, content that for no other reason to have had the brutal war behind them. The people of the upper levels were healthy, wealthy, and happy. Even after the Empire rose, things didn't really change all that much on Coruscant, at least not at first. But what did change was the alien species living below Coruscant. They were now viewed as pariah, as the Empire pushed an anti-alien sentiment, making Coruscant a dangerous place for many species in the galaxy. What had once been a grand melting pot now served as a warning, at least to those on the upper levels. However, the lower levels remained much the same. Palpatine found himself somewhat disinterested with what went on below him, and if they could not benefit him and did not hamper him, why would he mind? The Senate had not minded the existence of those less fortunate for hundreds of years. In Legends continuity, many of the criminal syndicates actually found their way to the upper levels of the city after the Empire fell, and the government crumbled before their eyes. So, if you would like to see that full story fleshed out in a video, be sure to let us know. But anyway, friends, we recently made a video about the lower levels of Coruscant that you guys seem to really enjoy. So today, I wanted to talk about a little something different. What about level 1 of Coruscant? What lie at the absolute deepest layer of the planet-spanning city? Level 1 was designated as the lowest megastructure level constructed on the planet of Coruscant. And according to Legends continuity, if you only look at the surface, the most that you can glean is that it is uninhabitable. We know that Coruscant began construction roughly 100,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. The only real mention of the lowest level of Coruscant that we have in canon is the Star Wars Absolutely Everything You Need to Know book, which was published in 2015 as the first part in the first wave of Star Wars canon novels. This novel was written in part to build up anticipation for The Force Awakens, having little details on the film before anything else did. Essentially, this is the only mention that we have in canon on the first level of Coruscant, and all that it mentions is that it's uninhabitable. The only other very brief time that it shows up is actually in a 2017 addition to Star Wars lore, being Star Wars Adventures number 25. In this, we follow Lael and Holdo, and all that is mentioned is, you can't even get to level 1 of Coruscant. Level 5 is as low as you can go. So if we don't have any information on what Coruscant looks like right now, what could it have looked like before the city was complete? And could this give us any idea of what the first level really holds before we turn to the pages of Legends continuity? Originally, Coruscant has 5,217 levels. The highest level was designated and set aside for the Jedi Order, politicians, and the wealthiest individuals in the entire galaxy. It was also one of the most technologically advanced places in the universe. The Republic and then the Empire all stemmed from Coruscant. It was considered the crown jewel of known space. But even though it was the crown jewel of the Republic, it is known that the Republic itself could not reach the lower levels of Coruscant, especially level 1. In fact, it's altogether entirely possible that level 1 of Coruscant hasn't even heard of the Republic before. That there's an entirely different ecosystem going on down there. Something completely separate from the Jedi, Sith, politics, and normal everyday life in the Star Wars galaxy. This is a world in and of itself. A place with mutants, hideous creatures that have never seen sunlight, artificial or otherwise, never shared a breath of fresh air with anyone in their entire existence. All we really have are rumors about level 1. Some say that it contains no oxygen whatsoever down there, that being in the vacuum of space is safer due to all of the toxins released, toxins built up over thousands of years by billions of inhabitants above. Some have even said that no light exists on the first level of Coruscant. It is a place of pitch black nothingness, a place perhaps not even disease can live any longer. This is what is written. The actual surface of the planet has been thoroughly buried. Those parts of the planet not covered by urban terrain include only small artificial lakes and the polar ice caps. The only place where the soil or rock of the planet sees daylight is the Monument Plaza at the pinnacle of the Manarai mountain range. The planet is not inert, and the site of the Imperial City was a volcanic plain, and at least one massive eruption is recorded in the legendary pre-Republic history. However, Coruscant is a tame world today, and its inhabitants probably employ geological engineering technologies in order to ameliorate natural tectonic and volcanic processes. This is what we know about the surface of Coruscant. It has also been recorded that Coruscant once contained large oceans, and of course, was known for its breathtaking mountain ranges. All of these mountain ranges at this point have been covered by city, But what is to say is that Coruscant may have looked a lot like our world does today. Many believe that the lower levels of Coruscant could look like the Undercity of Terrace, a mechanical wilderness on the ground level, beneath their upper, middle, and lower levels, and above the sewers was the underground city of Terrace. In Terrace, it was said that a century ago, rising levels of toxic pollution poisoned the oceans, and famine swept the planet. The rich hoarded food for their own, and the poor were left to starve and to die, as others looked up. It is a place of mutants, freaks, disease. It was known that many were banished to the lower levels of Terrace, which could also be said for Coruscant, sent there and locked away in the lower levels for crimes committed either by them or their ancestors. Although information is extremely scarce, we do believe we found something that may reside in level 1 of Coruscant, known as the Coruscanti Ogre. What makes this species so unique is no one can trace their origins anywhere else but Coruscant, meaning that at some point in time they were abandoned in the lower levels of the city, forgotten, untraced to their original home. Or perhaps Coruscant is their original home. Perhaps we can put a name to the freaks and the mutants, known as the Coruscanti Ogres. What's important about the Coruscanti Ogre is that they live below level 5, a place no others are permitted to venture. No one knew how many Coruscanti Ogres managed to come from Coruscant, or knew how many roamed the Undercity. Regardless of their origin though, they were classified as being another of the world's many unpleasant secrets. Planetary officials were content not so much about these brutish dwellers that populated the areas beneath the gleaming spires of the upper city, and had to keep them at bay. During the era that was still the rise of the Galactic Empire, the Coruscant Wildlife Management Department had the unstated responsibility for the ogres, and were given a generous amount of money to ensure that the ogres were kept confined in regions where they could have no contact with people. However, incompetent and corrupt bureaucrats from other government departments secretly exported a number of ogres off the world of Coruscant, and with the CWMD unable to deal with the matter as they had little oversight, ultimately, none truly cared if a few ogres somewhere went missing, and the problem remained quiet. These creatures were apparently then domesticated and experimented on, as they were physically extremely intimidating and had a violent nature. After this, their brains were given cybernetic implants, and ultimately, their purpose was to turn these now docile creatures into a small workforce of organic droids, reducing the money needed to contain them. Coruscanti ogres were also smuggled out of Coruscant by slavers and hunters alike, and their existence was a miserable one. No two Coruscanti ogres ever looked the same, each of them twisted in their own unique way due to the pollution of the world. While most of the ogres demonstrated similar features such as sparse patches of hair, leathery skin, and large misshapen heads with wide mouths containing jagged teeth, it is interesting to note that they were very different from one another. Millennia of exposure to sewage, pollution, and reactor radiation, as well as poor diet, had destroyed the ecosystem of Coruscant's lower levels, and contributed to the ogres' deformed, motley, mutated appearances. It was even believed once that these creatures had been primates, and were closely related to humans. However, their true origins are completely unconfirmed. So my friends, while unfortunately we cannot directly go to the level of Coruscant that we want to today, in levels 1 through 4, we do have a chance to look at the creatures that are from there to get an idea of what it looks like. A place of pure darkness and pollution, but a place where these life forms have still survived, and yet have been defined. So, while for some, Coruscant is a world of dreams, of glitz, glamour, wealth, beauty, for others, it is a realm of endless horror, just beneath their feet. Beneath all of the beauty, the waste, the corruption, lay the truly depraved, the truly lost, ogres of the deep. And so my friends, hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to the channel. While searching both in Legends and in Star Wars canon, one would be hard pressed to find anyone that eclipses the pure destructive capability of Abeloth. Her feats in the Force are legendary, as she has been able to achieve what other Force wielders would consider impossible. Many have heard the stories of how Abeloth is able to manipulate the minds of people on a mass scale, or overcome the Force influence of multiple extremely powerful beings including Luke Skywalker and Darth Krayt. But her most infamous feat in the Force would be the destruction of Coruscant, when Abeloth unleashed all of her rage and pain onto the unprepared city, all would fear her wrath and die. The total number of casualties from her rampage numbered in the billions, and both the Jedi and Sith were completely helpless to stop it. The decimation of Coruscant still stands as one, if not the wildest displays of Force power on record. It speaks to hidden levels of power previously thought to be unreachable by any being, and it has brought us to the conclusion that Abeloth is vastly more powerful than any of us had originally surmised. In this holocron, we're going to discuss exactly what Abeloth did to Coruscant, how she broke down the city and used a Force power that had never been seen before. The destruction of Coruscant came following its liberation at the hands of Luke, who took the planet back from the Sith. In the Fate of the Jedi series, Abeloth was far from the only issue the Jedi were facing. While she was definitely the biggest and most concerning, the Jedi were dealing with multiple galaxy-spanning threats, one of the largest being the re-emergence of the Sith coming from the faction known as the Lost Tribe of the Sith, being led by the individual Grand Lord Vol. Along with them, Luke was facing political troubles coming from an Imperial named Natasi Dala, who managed to rise to the place of chief in the state of the New Republic and threaten the Jedi Order. Dala was on a power-hungry revenge plot to kill Luke and destroy the reputation of the Jedi, a plan in which she was nearly successful. Because of her actions, there was left an opening for the Lost Tribe of the Sith to sneak their way and completely dominate and overtake the Senate. Of course, unbeknownst to them for a time, Abeloth was actually among the Sith in disguise, pulling the strings of the entire operation. Point being, this whole thing was a mess, the galaxy itself, but Luke, Jaina Solo, and the rest of the Jedi rallied together to march on Coruscant and take it back once and for all. The battle for Coruscant would take place mostly in secret over the course of a few hidden skirmishes, but soon, the truth would come out when Abeloth was center stage, revealing herself finally. The story around these events is quite extensive, since the buildup happens over several novels in the Fate of the Jedi series, but for the sake of brevity, we will summarize by saying that Abeloth's treachery was soon revealed to the Lost Tribe of the Sith, specifically their leader, Grand Lord Vol, who after discovering her infiltration, attempted to destroy her. In the Sith's attempt to bring an end to Abeloth, all they managed to accomplish though was bring her pain, which she then dealt back to them and everyone 20-fold. Pain was not something one inflicted on the Queen of Stars without her own pound of flesh. Reading from the novel, this is what happened next. Her anguish used the Force as a weapon, as she had so often before, but this time she was barely aware that she was releasing nearly inconceivable amounts of Force energy, doing so upon a city that was completely unprepared for it. There were several dozen beings within immediate range, some sleeping quietly in their beds. Most were with their families. They imploded. Farther away, others awoke in agony as their bodies were turned inside out, and chunks were ripped from their bones. The entire city was attacked by a wind filled with glass shards, each a shakar driven with a single purpose: to hurt anyone, anything living inside the city of glass. They were the Lost Tribe. They would suffer, all of them, as their leader had made her suffer. The shards melted as they pierced flesh, spreading white-hot, painful death. The buildings made of metal and glass dripped slowly towards the ground, smothering those unfortunate enough to be dwelling inside of them. The passage equates the glass shards to something known as shakar. To clarify, a shakar is a Sith weapon, one that was crafted following the Second Great Schism. It is a Force-imbued dagger made of pure glass. This lets us know that not only was Abeloth controlling swarms of glass shards, but each and every one of them were infused with the Force. Essentially, when weapons were imbued with the Force, it made them nearly unbreakable. But not only that, shakars themselves were extremely painful to be stabbed with, because of course, they were being a weapon made directly by Sith magic, made putrid with the dark side. It was because of this that the Sith treated them as a disrespectful method of assassination, but Abeloth took it further by melting the shards afterwards, just for the sake of more pain, destroying the Sith with a weapon of their own design. Beyond this, Abeloth was able to use her telekinesis to make the bodies of multitudes of people literally implode. although this was at least a quick death. Some were not as lucky. As the book stated, some were in total agony as they felt their bodies being turned inside out, chunks of flesh and muscle being torn right off their bones before they succumbed to the pain. The only thing we have even close to comparing this is when the clone of Starkiller released a wave of dark side energy, one that was so powerful that it disintegrated a squad of stormtroopers. But there again, compared to what Abeloth did, the troopers got off easy. These innocent people though on Coruscant did not. Abeloth definitely was using a form of Force Rend, which is an act of lifting someone with telekinesis and reversing all of their joints or breaking their bones all at once. Of course, this kind of Force Rend is vastly more barbaric, but her savage punishment would not end there. Abeloth's powers extended to the point of being able to superheat metal and glass to the point where it became molten liquid. The only force power we can really equate this to is the Jedi ability of Force Fire, the act of using the Force to cause something flammable to spontaneously combust. The Sith made a more destructive version of this with Force explosions, but of course, no one had ever reached the levels of this terrifying entity. It is assumed that Force Fire could also be used to heat metallic materials as well, but to the point of making them melt, this was something that only Abeloth could achieve. But Abeloth was able to do this with multiple buildings on Coruscant in a single burst. Abeloth created a multi-city block level attack that turned every building around her for miles instantly to lava. But of course, this is Coruscant, where the city is far bigger than average, so this isn't exactly multi-city block level, as it is far more likely to be a large city level. Yet, it even gets worse. Abeloth found herself displeased with the residents of Coruscant, deciding to punish them further with total decimation, tremors that became earthquakes all over the planet. This would only be the very beginning. The cherry on top of this terrifying disaster was absolute anarchy. Abeloth formed a volcano using the Force, bending Coruscant, rending it to her will. Just like her own home planet, Abeloth would make a volcano appear in the middle of the city. This would have required Abeloth to use the Force to literally shift the tectonic plates of Coruscant to make this occur, a feat that goes far beyond the realms of power we've conceived thus far. She would then detonate this volcano, leaving a huge crater on Coruscant of melted ash and ruin. My friends, there was certainly nothing the Jedi could have done against such power. These levels are not recorded by any other being besides perhaps the Bedlam spirits, and this technically wasn't even with Abeloth, was at the very height of her power. By now, she had absorbed so many people's life energy that she was approaching stages of strength in the Force that were unquantifiable. Had she been able to continue feeding, Abeloth truly would have been unstoppable, destroying the galaxy and remaking it as she saw fit, using the feats collected before, and how she reshaped the original planet of the Ones, and the kind of devastation that she wrought upon Coruscant. She was slightly over planet level in terms of raw power, and was likely higher. It was stated that if she had been able to reach the true height of her power, she would have been able to reshape the universe as she saw fit. This means that the decimation of Coruscant was less than 1% of Abeloth's final potential, with it being implied that perhaps there was no real limit to her power at all. She had been able to destroy cities worth of buildings without even meaning to, only by her anguish. It was this alone that released these waves of power. By our own estimation, she had accidentally used 7 extremely complex and devastating abilities. Force abilities all used at the same time. Implosion, rend, wind, imbue, melting the shards individually, and then melting the buildings themselves, all on a mass scale. Again, this was without ever her intention behind it. With intention, she was able to shift the tectonic plates of Coruscant to cause earthquakes and summon a volcano. I think the point has been made that Abeloth is vastly more powerful than many assumed, and the threat of her arrival should be equated to Ragnarok for a galaxy far, far away. But of course, my friends,
Palpatine was wrong. Those who live under fear cannot wait to throw off that yoke. I've seen the footage taken after the news of the Emperor's death hit the newsnet. The people of Coruscant celebrated louder and longer than anyone. This was a quote by Luke Skywalker when he was facing off against Grand Admiral Thrawn. attempting to prove a point about the Empire and Sidious. Here, he refers to the loud uprising that occurred on Coruscant following the Emperor's death above Endor. In 4 ABY, the impossible occurred, and the rebellion triumphed over the Empire. But not just in destroying the Death Star again, but this time the Emperor and Lord Vader fell along with it. The Empire was officially finished, and it was only a matter of time before the regime dissolved. When the news of this victory reached the HoloNet, the Imperials did their best to suppress it immediately, only for it to reach all across the galaxy, sparking celebration and more rebellion everywhere. But there were no celebrations like the one held on Coruscant, but things get bloody quickly, and it too eventually devolved into a full-fledged riot. Greetings again, students of the Force, and welcome back to the archives. It's time again to open a holocron into the historical event which often flies under the radar, that being the riots of Coruscant, as this is one of the most shocking events to happen following the death of the Emperor. And today, we are going to detail everything that happened on Coruscant both in Legends and canon immediately after Endor. How did the capital of the Empire react to the death of their leader? Only a couple of hours following the Battle of Endor, it would be Rebel intelligence networks that began broadcasting the news of the Empire's defeat and the death of Palpatine all across the galaxy. Imperial forces and agencies were in utter disarray, which left several gaps for the news to reach millions of systems. Not millions of people, millions of systems. Though the Empire would be able to censor and suppress most of the news outlets going into the core worlds. The Rebel intelligence, though, had one planet in mind and immediately mobilized to get the word out to Coruscant and the core. Despite the fact that those worlds were heavily populated with Imperial loyalists, the truth needed to be heard before the Empire was going to crumble completely, and was able to put its own spin on the events of Endor. Traveling directly to Coruscant, several rebel insurgent groups and pilots of the Wraith Squadron would override the normal Imperial channels on the HoloNet, retransmitting the true news feed out to the wide band. This is what the rebels did immediately after Endor. The massive rebroadcast was heard on every billboard in the city, every personal comlink, and every household holoprojector. The undeniable footage of the second Death Star being destroyed, and the celebration of other planets was shown in full glory on Coruscant, everywhere at once. As a result, a substantial amount of Coruscanti citizens made their way to the Monument Plaza, which was just outside of the Imperial Palace. They celebrated and cheered, setting off fireworks and chanting, "Down with the Emperor," as well as the phrase, "Ji Shata Gashal," the Huttese phrase for jubilation and exultation. But this was no mere peaceful celebration. This crowd was armed, and they attacked Imperial patrols as they stormed the plaza. The rioters pulled down a massive statue of Palpatine using ropes and chains. Imperial symbols were defaced by Rebel and Rebel sympathizers, and this was not just happening in the Monument Plaza, but in several sectors of Coruscant at once. Scrambling to respond, the Empire made a deadly decision. The panicked director of Imperial intelligence dispatched stormtrooper death squads, as well as security forces, to shut down the riots using lethal force. She gave the military and the police full authority to exercise any method they deemed necessary in order to restore order. And when the patrol speeders of the troopers arrived, they opened fire straight into the crowd. The Coruscanti rioters fought back, however, using their own weapons and hurling broken pieces of what was once Palpatine's statue. Some citizens even jumped into the police speeders to fight the stormtroopers personally. The police, however, kept firing, trying to suppress the crowd that had now become an angry mob. The civilian death toll was catastrophic here, but the rioters would not go down without bringing a sizable portion of the stormtroopers with them. Eventually, under the oppressive blaster fire, the riots were quelled, and many citizens were beaten, roughly arrested, or murdered right there. People who had set off fireworks earlier were lined up and executed by a firing squad. Rebel sympathizers ran for their lives as stormtroopers began to go door to door, dragging them away. Martial law was instated all over Coruscant, but rebel insurgent groups still thrived in the underworld. It wasn't long until they began organizing uprisings yet again. This was not over. A sizable number of the Coruscant population was emboldened by the Empire's brutal crackdown, and therefore joined the rebellion instantaneously. causing the planet to devolve into a state of literal civil war. Some sectors remained free from Imperial control, and its citizens entrenched themselves with rebel resistance fighters, while other sectors of Coruscant actively fought against their neighbors and supported the Empire. When this all occurred, the IBS attempted to establish a blockade around Coruscant and make a coordinated effort to restore order with the Stormtrooper Corps. Areas of Coruscant with vital government buildings, such as the Verity District and the neighboring Federal District, were heavily fortified with checkpoints and barricades. The war had officially come to Coruscant in full swing. Many people think that the Battle of Endor marked the conclusion of the Galactic Civil War, when in reality, the Empire was far from finished even though they lost their leader. To make things worse, the Empire had a small victory, as they kept the Federal District relatively secure. The other Imperial sectors and fortifications would eventually fall prey to continual attacks though, with rebel soldiers and Coruscanti citizens alike utilizing guerrilla warfare against Imperial authorities. The blockade over Coruscant did not matter for long, as the Empire was fracturing everywhere. The Imperial warlords were starting to look out for themselves after the death of the Emperor and the power vacuum created. Gallius Rax recalled the fleet from Coruscant eventually, leaving it completely defenseless against the freshly installed New Republic. As the fighting intensified, Imperial forces steadily lost ground, as they had no continual support from outside Imperial forces whatsoever. Eventually, in a desperate move, the ISB would place Grand Vizier Mas Amedda under house arrest in the quarters of the Imperial Palace, as fighting had reached the Federal District. And Mas Amedda, following Sidious's death, became the public face of the Empire. Technically, authority of the Republic had fallen to Mas Amedda after the Emperor's passing, but Amedda was far too scared and too weak to actually lead and rally the Empire in any meaningful way. Had Tarkin been in command, or even worse, Thrawn, the Empire would not have fallen as quickly as it did. The Grand Moffs and Governors had become warlords, all attempting to hoard resources of the Empire for their own corners of space and their own goal, holding it away from the larger entity. In the Imperial Palace, things were only getting worse for the Empire, as Mas Amedda had attempted to contact both Mon Mothma and Princess Leia in order to turn himself in. However, the rebels refused to take him, and instead demanded that he find a way to consolidate what remained of the Empire and abdicate their power. It was after this that Mas Amedda, with no hope remaining, attempted to escape justice and tried to fling himself off of a balcony of the Imperial Palace. He was stopped, however, by a spy from the Moff Council, who told Amedda that they were rallying together to strike back against the New Republic. After this, the Empire's hold on Coruscant would slowly disintegrate, and it would be claimed by the New Republic, though Imperial loyalists continued to make themselves a problem all the way until the Battle of Jakku, as the Empire began adopting guerrilla warfare tactics against the New Republic, and the tides shifted. But anyway, friends, this is what happened to Coruscant, and why it's important to document this, and how the literal capital of the Empire cheered the loudest when it was crumbled by Luke Skywalker and the Rebellion. We plan to continue this story in another video to cover everything that happened on Coruscant after the fall of the Empire, so if you're interested in that, and our continued videos attempting to chronicle all of Coruscant's history and lore, please be sure to reach out and like the video. But tell us, had you wondered
Why did the New Republic move their capital off of the world of Coruscant? Greetings, Acolytes of the Force, and welcome back to the Archives. Something that we learned over the course of Star Wars The Force Awakens was that the New Republic has actually decided to move their capital off of the world of Coruscant. And what we found was extremely fascinating, why the New Republic was in fear of Coruscant continuing to be the capital of the entire galaxy and the governmental force. The Senate no longer resided on Coruscant as their headquarters, and it was more or less turned into just another city world in the core Inner Rim. For 25,000 years though, Coruscant stood as the center point of the galaxy, having been established as the capital of the Old Republic since its very birth. This was because a majority of the hyperlanes in the entire galaxy all converged and branched off from Coruscant, making it a perfect hub to get almost anywhere in the entire universe. However, shortly following the Battle of Endor and the end of the Galactic Empire, the New Republic would officially cancel Coruscant as the capital, moving on to other systems instead. That's right, my friends. We said systems plural, as the capital of the New Republic would no longer lie on just one world any longer, but instead, the New Republic established something different. And in today, we will explain exactly why. So buckle up in your transports and get your star maps ready, because into hyperspace we go. One of the primary reasons the New Republic moved the capital was because of all of the negative connotations that represented Coruscant in the era of the Empire, as the Empire affected Coruscant more than any other system in the entire galaxy. We see in The Mandalorian, in this New Republic era, they seem to go almost overboard as much as possible trying to distance their image from the Galactic Empire. Coruscant still remained at the central hub of the entire universe, with the city containing trillions of citizens, and the New Republic did find uses for Coruscant, making it the headquarters for the Defense Force along with the New Republic amnesty program. During the reign of the Empire, Coruscant became Palpatine's throne world, and it was from this planet that he spread his evil and oppression. Coruscant was contaminated with evil dictators, surrounded by human centrism and tyranny. Even the citizens of Coruscant hated living there because of the Empire's presence. Later on, Luke Skywalker would even mention that after the Battle of Endor, it was Coruscant that cheered the loudest out of all the planets in the entire galaxy. But interestingly enough, it wasn't just because the Empire that the capital was moved, but because of the negative feelings towards the Old Republic as well, as the New Republic not only hated the Empire, but the previous Republic as well. One thing we cannot overlook is that the Old Republic was replaced by the Empire for a reason. Palpatine didn't exactly seize power, it was given to him freely by the citizens of the galaxy and the Senate. The Old Republic was corrupt, and they had enacted policies that erupted into the Clone Wars, a war so horrific that the galaxy panicked, fearing for their safety, voting, and putting their faith in a fascist regime. Despite the terror that would come from the Empire, people still remembered how life was under the Old Republic, and they weren't ready to go back to it directly. The New Republic not only had to distance their image from the Empire, but from the democratic predecessors as well. This was in an effort to also bring back the separatist worlds that had seceded from the Republic before the outbreak of the war. The New Republic wanted everyone in the fold so that they could remain strong and have a unified galaxy. For that, the hatchet had to be buried, and the separatists needed to come back willingly. The Empire had strong-armed the Confederacy to surrender and join them through sheer military force alone, and the New Republic was forced to be so much more democratic, especially because the Separatists debatably got the worst of the entire Empire in their reign. The answer was simple: to dismantle the image of what was and build what could be. To put things simply, the rest of the galaxy at large had turned against Coruscant. It was a symbol of corruption and misplaced power. It had grown even more vile with the reign of Sidious, as the Empire would murder civilians on a whim. No riots were ever allowed on the capital city, and whoever was caught would be executed by the direct command of the Emperor. So if the capital was no longer to be on Coruscant, where was the New Republic capital placed? Well, this is where things got interesting. The New Republic's hopeful solution was to ensure that every world had a say in the government, not just one planet. And because of this, the capital of the New Republic went by a system where it rotated around planets every few years, the capital constantly changing, representing the now shared power. Each planet in the Inner Rim would get a chance to host Senate meetings for a certain allotted period of time, before again the capital would be moved. Following the Battle of Endor, the first planet to get this honor was Chandrila, and it would be here where Mon Mothma was elected Chancellor, and a new seat of representatives would preside. By the time of the Cold War with the First Order, the capital resided on Hosnian Prime, which would be destroyed ultimately by Starkiller Base. But all of this brings up a very interesting criticism, one that we believe directly led to the fall of the New Republic itself, and that is that the New Republic was overcompensating for the Empire and the crimes of Coruscant. This is shown masterfully in The Mandalorian, where we are introduced to the amnesty program, where they captured former Imperials and were put them through a new process of rehabilitation. This process was meant to break off all the indoctrination given to Imperial workers. However, the process was considered very dystopian. The intense positivity in the amnesty program was labeled as creepy, especially when we're shown that this air of positivity is not shared with the rest of the New Republic offices. We're shown how apathetic the Defense Force is to problems happening in the Outer Rim, as the people of the New Republic were so desperate for peace that they ignored any sign of opposition. They would even repeat the mistakes from the Old Republic by lending aid to the highest bidders. Not only that, but their ineptitude shows, as they let Imperial activity go unchecked and their defense force be spread entirely thin. When the Rebel Alliance became the New Republic, they thought that dissolving the military would make a strong statement of peace to the rest of the galaxy. However, they didn't realize that by decommissioning their fighting force and making it a shadow of its former self, that this would weaken them and give leeway to their enemies waiting in the shadows. This strange need to move into a completely opposite way that the Empire operated, and to be directly opposed to the Empire in all ways, made the New Republic extremely soft. They did not believe that Imperial warlords were working in unity, and they even allowed some loyal to the Empire within their very ranks. The Empire that would dismantle the Republic from the inside. All of this is to say that moving the capital around from one world to the next may sound like a good and a fair idea in conception, but in practice, it leaves too many opportunities for things to go wrong. It also leaves the capital completely unprotected, which the New Republic paid for. Coruscant had the advantage of being in the very heart of the Republic. It took extreme planning and careful maneuvering for any attacking force to hit the capital accurately, and we believe most likely that the capital of Coruscant would have detected the attack of Starkiller Base, and likely could have even done something to stop it, mobilizing a New Republic military force. We learned in the Clone Wars that the Separatists only managed to attack Coruscant because Palpatine gave them the direct opening from the inside. But the fact that Hosnian Prime was outside of the very heart of the Republic, it was vulnerable and was ultimately destroyed. It's admirable that the New Republic wants to leave some breathing room after how tightly squeezed the oppression of the Empire was, as well as attempting to stop the festering scum of corruption that happened in the Old Republic. But again, they overcompensated for this fault. At best, they're creating a toxically positive environment that only serves to create apathy for the bureaucracy. And at worst, where now Grand Admiral Thrawn is able to pull together a large enough force to threaten the safety of the galaxy yet again. Coruscant was a sign of the Old Republic. It was a sign of the Empire. But there's reason for this. It was heavily fortified, extremely safe, and was truly the very beating heart of the galaxy, no matter who ran it. The issue, as always, is not the world of Coruscant, but those that rule over it. But anyway, my friends, what are your thoughts on the New Republic's hatred for Coruscant and the galaxy at large? What are your thoughts on the fatal mistake of them deciding to move the capital world off of Coruscant as a whole? Let us know your thoughts on the political climate of the Empire during this New Republic era. Thank you as always so much for visiting the channel today, and may the Force be with you.